Hey everybody, Craig from the University of Applied Research and Development, and it is our privilege to have Dr. Paula Gordon, who's an instructor, contract instructor with the Auburn University in their outreach program. Hi, Paula, good to see you.
Hello, how are you?
I'm really happy that you're with us. I was
Thank you.
really interested to read an article that you wrote recently, or I read it recently on Disaster Preparedness website about the all hazards approach. Why don't you just tell us about your history in emergency management and how you became interested in it?
Well, it's a rather long story. Goes back to having been in an earthquake, a major earthquake way back uh, when. I won't tell you when because it will date me. Uh, let's see. I have been following all kinds of catastrophic events and uh, studying them. And in the course of my career in Washington, D.C., I have uh, been a full-time consultant with the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Just prior to that, I was involved with, that was for two-year period where I had responsibilities that were wide-ranging and included things like being the liaison to the American Medical Association, focusing on medical aspects of disasters, and also looking into um, disaster preparedness generally. But trying to, the other major role that I had when I was at FEMA was to do an issue paper, which was on the, which resulted in coming up with the uh, a recommendation that the agency adopt an all hazards approach to emergency management.
Mm.
And I was commissioned to do that because the Congress was very upset with the approach that FEMA was taking at the time to nuclear attack preparedness. And so what I did, this might be very instructive for students because it's one of the more valuable contributions I think I've made to the field. Um, this whole process is outlined in an article called Comparative Scenario and Options Analysis. And that article is posted on my GordonHomeland.com website. What I did was I interviewed all the top 25 people in the agency to find out what their perspective was and what they were would recommend for FEMA at that point in time. This was in the early 80s. And I came up with three different approaches. I put them into a graph form. And then one of the approaches was, an additional approach was the status quo, not doing anything. But the last approach was suggested to me by the librarian at FEMA, who pointed out that West Germany at the time, it wasn't West Germany at that time, had an all hazards approach in effect to emergency management, in that they focused on functions rather than have discrete section on or category of nuclear attack preparedness, which was, as I say, creating great concern on the part of some key members of Congress at the time. And what I did then was put this into an issue paper and parsed it out very fully. And surprisingly enough to me, I compared and contrasted all these three different options. And surprising to me was the fact that the group of 25 who were tasked to decide where the agency should go from that point forward, that group of 25 decided on the fifth option, which I thought was extraordinary. And one of the things I learned, which has been valuable to me ever since, was that this kind of presentation of of options and parsing out the options along various parameters about their acceptability, the definition, what would be accomplished, what the pushback would be, whether the public would be accepting. That this kind of approach to educating, to impacting or influencing the policy of an agency was a very good one because it didn't result in any defensiveness on the part of people who had different points of view going in. In fact, they could see very rapidly by looking at this matrix chart where their particular approach was different from another approach, and how the all hazards approach was really the one that was going to be most beneficial to the country. Moving on from FEMA, I also, before FEMA, I participated in a crisis situation involving, I was at the Federal Energy Office, which later became the Federal Energy Administration, which then became the Department of Energy. I was there at the time. Interestingly enough, our offices were in Lincoln's War Room in an old historic building across from the White House, but with very tall doorways, which I thought was very interesting. Anyway, I was involved in the so-called independent trucker strike. And the independent truckers were very upset by some major policies that had been put in place by the government, and they went on strike. And this had major ramifications for the economy of the country. And at one point, they got so upset that they threatened civil disobedience, and they threatened to destroy their trucks, which amounts to tens of thousands of dollars, if not more, and violence was threatened, and so I attended as a kind of undercover agent from the government. I got permission from my boss at Federal Energy Office to sit in all the meetings of the strikers. It was sort of informally detailed through the National Governors Conference at the time. And the National Governors Conference was the organization that was overseeing the discussions and the arbitration, in effect, with whatever federal officials they get to talk with them. And so I would feed back to my boss what the demands were, and it was really touch and go for a while. My boss in turn would talk with his boss, who would talk with the White House, and finally I called one afternoon and I said, "You have to field William Simon, who was then the head of the Federal Energy Office. You have to, he has to show up tonight." It was a Sunday, I think. And I think he showed up along with a senator, and they began to bring about a resolution to this crisis. Couple other crises I've been involved in within the Y2K crisis, which I found out early on. I was a visiting professor at George Washington University at the time. And I attended a workshop that they had, a retreat that the department had. And one of the presenters was Stuart Umpleby, who talked about the threat. This was in 1998, the summer of 1998. And he talked about the imminent threat posed by Y2K technology failures. And this particular department included information science people, and none of them really understood the embedded systems problem. The embedded systems, complex digital systems, data systems, control systems are different from and more complex than than computers are, and they. Uh, I was dismayed that there wasn't an understanding and ready um, interest or concern for the problem that Professor Umpleby noted, the kinds of failures you could get to all of the critical infrastructure. There could be a cascading effect. For instance, on the grid, the GPS could be affected, pipelines, nuclear power plants, which was very great concern to me, and nuclear weapon systems. Uh, all of this could be affected by date-sensitive digital complex digital systems. And this was just not being absorbed by the people at the retreat. And it occurred to me that if they weren't getting it, a lot of other people weren't understanding it either. And so Professor Appleby and I decided to go about briefing people in Washington on Capitol Hill and the General Accounting Office, in the Senate. Um, we talked to everyone we could, tried to explain to them the seriousness of it. We put on some conferences and some major programs and brought in Ed Yurden, who had written a book called Time Bomb 2000. Perhaps you remember that book. He talked about things that go boom in the night. And these were the complex digital systems which were could cause failures in nuclear power plants. As late as October of 1999, believe it or not, the government had not taken in Mr. Koskinen, who was the head of the White House effort on Point of Cave. They had not taken the kinds of steps that should have been taken, from my vantage point at least, with regard to nuclear power plants. And finally, in October of 1999, just 2 months before the rollover, they sent out a team of two people, one from the Department of Commerce, National Institute for Standards and Technology, and one from the private sector who headed a software company. And they went around and they talked with nuclear power plants and made sure that they were prepared. And many of those who were not prepared rolled back their clocks to 1979, so that this hardly anybody knows about this kind of insider information, so that there would be no failures triggered by the rollover on January 1st, midnight. Now, since then, one of the things that I've become mostly deeply involved in has been the pandemic, and I have followed it very closely since January of 2020, and decided that I would add it to as an elective course to a certificate program that I teach and helped launch at Auburn University Outreach. Originally, it was Auburn University's Center for Governmental Services, but is now under the aegis of Auburn University Outreach. And this is a really superb, from my vantage point, emergency management certificate program, which includes 4 core courses, and then one has a choice of several different elective courses. One of the elective courses that I teach is on the drug crisis. Another is on critical infrastructure, which I really focused a lot on during Y2K, with a major white paper on that, which was on the web, and which I think was somewhat influential in the way things unfolded. Got a lot of attention. Um, uh, in my experience, there's been nothing comparable to the complexity and the multi-layered uh, complications of, of the pandemic crisis. And it is most, I have had to bring to bear on it every area that I've ever studied, because it has a lot to do with organizational behavior. That's another area that I've taught a lot in. And with it has to do also with another area of expertise that I have that I've written a lot about. That's knowledge transfer and research utilization. Did a lot of work for the National Science Foundation on research utilization and help them to uh, reconsider the approach they were taking to applied science.
Dr. Paula, just because of time and making sure that we honor your time, what I'd like to do is just share on the screen, Dr. Paula, the article that you wrote that I
Okay.
found to be very, very, very thorough. I hope you can see it on the screen right now.
Yes.
Yep. So I just want to highlight this for everyone. This is in the disasterpreparedness.com, and it's in the resiliency section here. It was written last year by Dr. Paula, and it has some really clear graphics and information. And I was hoping you might be able to talk us through the typology, and then also to talk about just briefly the multi-tiered. Let me see if I can grab that multi-tiered. We get multi-tiered disasters, just to make that clear for people who may not be aware of the typologies and the multi-tiered disasters. So can you share with us a little bit about this?
Yes. This came about when I was working as a full-time consultant to FEMA, and it occurred to me that there was such a concentration on large scale and medium scale emergencies that there was this kind of precluded any attention to larger scale catastrophes, which could involve millions of people, if not more. And so I developed this way of looking at emergencies and the multi-tiered nature of them. And one approach to looking at that is to look at the numbers of people who might be injured or killed as a result of the emergency. And I gathered all kinds of background information on that and wrote a publication that included data on the numbers of people and the property damage done for a 10-year period in the United States. I had an interesting discussion with General Russell Honore about this. I met him after Katrina at a couple of conferences. In the first conference that I met him at, I drew on a paper napkin a rough sketch of the typology. And I said to him, do you agree that most planning stops in the middle for emergency preparedness? And he definitely agreed with that. I also asked him another question, which might be of great interest to students, and that was, I asked him, this was the first thing I said to him when I met him after I said, are you Russell Honore? Because he had lost some weight since Katrina, and I wasn't totally certain that it was him in the hallway at a conference. And I said, I have a question for you. I said, would you say that you are one of the only people in the aftermath of Katrina who was involved in writing after action reports and reporting on it to Congress, who understood that Katrina was different, that because of the unprecedented size of it, involving a 92,000 square mile area, uh, and and because of the fact that all of the major elements of the critical infrastructure were in a state of failure, would you not agree that you were one of the only people who recognized the fact that this was a disaster of unprecedented scale? And he said yes. And I thought that was very, very illuminating. Also, somewhat humorous in that such a long question would have such a short answer. But he understood, as few people have understood, that there was hardly anything that could have been done in Katrina in first days in the aftermath. And in fact, he had said on a CNN program that he had likened responding to Katrina as being on a football team which could not gain any yardage in the first half.
Mm,
And that is exactly, and yet what you had with Katrina, you had this unusual scapegoating of everyone who had any
right.
role whatsoever. And I did write that up in a paper and presentation I gave at University of Nevada on called the matrix analysis. And I think your students would find this of great interest. That particular presentation is posted at um, GordonPublicAdministration.com.
Okay. I'll make sure that I get the link to that and put that in the show notes. Your other Gordon Homeland website, I did put the link in the chat. I went and
Okay,
found it while you were talking and I've put it in the chat so people
oh,
have
great.
that. Can I just scroll down the page to the multi-tiered section, which we just talked about a moment ago, expanding the course of content to cover multi-tiered disasters. Can you just briefly explain what are multi-tiered disasters? And you've got a list here.
Um, well, I think the pandemic is a perfect example. You have you if you identify all the key stakeholders and all those who are influencing the direction uh, of the response to the pandemic, you find that there could not be more differences in perspectives on the parts of all key players. And in fact, you might even say there are parallel universes when it comes to the approach that's being taken by those in the medical community to um, to the pandemic. Um, there are, for instance, the Great Barrington Declaration, which now has over 800,000 signatories from doctors all over the world. There is a newer a declaration that was put together with Dr. Robert Malone's under his leadership and with others in the world at the Rome Summit on the Pandemic, which was held in September. And they have thousands of signatories as well. These doctors are urging that early treatment be emphasized, and they are urging that doctors have the freedom to treat uh, patients based on their understanding and knowledge of medicine, What is happening, however, is that they're often being precluded from doing that. For instance, so-called repurposed drugs such as hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, which have been used widely throughout the world effectively, have not been fully authorized to be used in the United States and other places as well. And one of the reasons is that has to do with science, and this is one of the multi-tiered disasters I think involved with the pandemic is that there are some in the hierarchy of the government in the United States who are responsible for the policy in the United States, who are focusing primarily on a traditional approach to science, which involves what you call controlled studies, a reliance on controlled studies, which can take several years to accomplish. And when you take a repurposed drug and you try to, in the United States, and you try to use it, even though it's proven safe for the use and many other uses, it has to go through all kinds of trials that make it very difficult for the the drug to be used in a timely fashion. This happened with HIV in the 80s when a drug known as Bactrim, Bactrim, was widely used, and then the FDA made it impossible for it to be widely used for a 2-year period while it underwent all kinds of studies. And as a consequence, thousands of lives were lost unnecessarily. I mean, it had been saving lives up to then. And this was an example of how disasters can be created by unwittingly by people who are kind of mired as um, General Honore was wont to say, "Don't get stuck on stupid." With a pandemic, you have to do as you have to fight the battle with the ammunition that you have, and if you're precluded from doing that, lots of people will lose their lives unnecessarily. There's another aspect to this that hardly anybody is paying attention to, and that has to do with some recent scientific uh, technological innovations that have to do with the, one of the major ones that I've been involved with and I've tracked down in the course of developing this course on the pandemic has to do with a so-called intelligent disinfection door. And this is being utilized in places like Tyson's packing plant, in Chrysler plants, in nursing homes, and it's even being utilized in the hospitality sector in the UAE. What it amounts to is as a person walks, it's a 10-second process, and you can look it up on my LinkedIn website, or I'll be happy to send it to you if you want to email me. There's a video that was done demonstrating this drawer that was on cable news a year or so ago, and it's a matter of walking through a doorway which utilizes 3 different things, one being UV light, one being ozone, and one being a disinfectant spray, which is harmless to humans. And also there's a thermographic feature which will take your temperature. So you will know as you will be anything on the surface, including your shoes, will all of the bacteria, all of the RNA and the viruses will be killed as a result of going through this 10-second process. And I think that we would do very well to utilize these throughout the world so as to stop the spread in facilities and be assured that the spread of viruses and not just the coronavirus, but other viruses as well and variants of the coronavirus be stopped as fully as possible through taking these kinds of measures.
Hmm. Well, Dr. Paula, this has been really interesting, and I have the links to you in the chat and also in the description. What's the best way for people to get hold of you if they want to reach out to you about Auburn University's course that you've developed or for consulting? What's the best way for people to get hold of you?
My email address is pgordon@rcn.com. And then if you look up on Google or DuckDuckGo search engine, you can find me on LinkedIn under my full name there that you see on the screen, Paula D. Gordon, Ph.D. in Washington, D.C.
Well, thank you very much for your time, and everybody else that's watching, and for our students and our graduates. If you'd like to improve your qualifications, then remember that we have our Bachelor and Master's program in emergency management, and we do recognise the training and the experience that you have in emergency management in your industry and give you credit for that, and we'd love to get you connected to us. So do go to uard.ac.nz or uard.org, and in the show notes for this interview, there are the links to Dr. Paula's website, also in the chat, so you can reach out to her. So thank you very much for being with us, Dr. Paula.